Here are some reasons why you may not want to have a living will. My name is Laura Hurd, and I'm an attorney in San Antonio, Texas, and I do not have a living will, and I do not advise my husband to have a living will. Does that surprise you? Well, let me be clear and say a living will is not a will. Everyone needs a will. A will distributes your property at your death. A living will is a misnomer because it does not do anything with your property. A living will determines whether or not to keep you alive on artificial life support. It's the document that says pull the plug. And in the 35 years that I've been an attorney, I've never had anyone come into my office and say, yes, I want to be kept alive at all costs, no matter what. Although that is one of the options. You can initial on the directive to physicians or living will. I've never seen anybody initial that one. So there is a document in Texas that we call a directive to physicians, and it is generally known around the country by the term a living will. And every state has some form of this document with slightly different wording. The directive to physicians or living will is something that the federal law says, and the federal law applies in every state, says that if you have one, the doctors must honor it. It is a form of advance directive. There are actually 3 different kinds of advance directives. There's a living will, there's a DNR or do not resuscitate order, and there is a medical power of attorney. And whenever you go into the hospital and they say, do you have an advance directive? You can say, yes, I have a medical power of attorney. But usually the person who asks you that question is thinking only of a directive to physicians. I have a medical power of attorney, and my husband does as well. And I think everyone needs a medical power of attorney because that's the document that gives your agent the right to make the decision for you. It is much more broad than a directive to physicians. It covers any kind of medical condition that you might have and says that if you need to be put in a nursing home and you can't communicate, that your agent can make that decision. Or if you're temporarily disabled and can't communicate, then your agent can decide treatment decisions that don't have anything to do with life or death. But then later on, when you become able to communicate, then you can take back over. But it also does include the decision of whether or not to keep you alive on artificial life support. That's a much more flexible document. And so for many people, they choose the medical power of attorney instead of a directive to physicians, although you can have both. And then there's the third option, which is do not resuscitate, which says that EMS should not use a defibrillator or CPR on you if you're having a heart attack. They come to your house and there's really nothing that EMS can do. Their hands are tied. There's no doctor involved. It's simply they can't do anything to resuscitate you. If you're in hospice care, they generally have you sign a DNR. If you have a do not resuscitate order, then you may never even make it to the hospital. There are these options, and for some people the right thing to do is to have a living will or directive to physicians because they don't want that decision to cause a rift in the family. They don't want their loved ones to have to make a life or death decision and then feel guilty about it. Particularly in blended families, if the second wife says, go ahead and pull the plug, the children from the first marriage may accuse the second wife of murdering their parent. And you wouldn't want that to happen. Or your loved one that you've named may not have the courage to do that, and even though they're supposed to, they just won't make that decision because it's too hard on them emotionally. So some people take that decision out of the hands of their loved one because they don't feel their loved one is capable of making such an emotional decision, and they say, I'd rather have the doctors decide. You have 2 doctors certify that you can no longer sustain life without artificial life support and that there's no hope, and then they pull the plug. On the other hand, some people say, you know, those doctors don't really know me, they don't love me, and they might be influenced by the cost in keeping me alive. I'd rather have a loved one make that decision. So that's one reason you might not want to have a living will. The other reason that you might not want to have one is that you may want to wait a while. A directive to physicians is going to take place immediately. The two doctors meet, they decide there's no hope, they pull the plug, it's over and done with. But medical technology is always changing, and as time progresses, it may be decades before you actually use that medical power of attorney or the directive to physicians. You may sign a directive to physicians in your 20s or 30s, and it may not be used until you're 60 or 70 years old. And by that time, medical technology is entirely different. Or it may be that they're right on the verge of finding a cure, and you're in a condition which is right now terminal, but a month from now, they're going to break through with a cure that solves everything. And so you'd rather wait a month and take the advanced cure that's about to happen. Or it may be that you want your family to pray about it and see if God will intervene. Miracles happen. Or it may be that you just don't trust the doctors and feel that, you know, sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they're wrong, and you may know someone where the doctor said there's no hope, and then 2 or 3 weeks later they recovered and lived a long time afterwards. So if you feel for some reason that there should be a delay at least until someone is really sure that there's no hope, then you may not want an advance directive. You may want to have your family wait and make that decision later with a medical power of attorney. So the bottom line is it's a very personal decision. It's the right thing for some people, and I'm not saying that you should go out and shred yours if you have one, but it is a decision that you need to make very thoughtfully and carefully and not make it under pressure or without giving thought to the consequences. It is just a decision that is different, and it's right for some people and not for others.